Hi, I'm Kimberly Guessling. I'm the president and CEO for Alive Hospice. I'm here with Becca Stevens today, the founder of Thistle Farms and the Magdalene House, and we're going to have a conversation around our legacies, what we want to be remembered for. But most importantly with Becca, I want to understand, how she inspires others and how others have inspired her. When I was younger, my dad said when you die and somebody memorializes you, that they shouldn't only have the words to say that you are a hard worker.
Yeah.
That you really had to live the memory that you wanted people to remember you by. And when I was sharing that with folks at the office, we started talking about living the legacy you want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So we created these incredible conversation cards, which you have your beautiful set there. And when Liz and I were talking about, Liz is our director of communication and marketing, when we were talking about you and the inspiration that you give to so many women, you've created something that is known worldwide. And then we really do your own mills at this point.
Exactly.
But you really have. You've created a movement that you make it perfectly acceptable to ask women if they're survivors, to ask women about their program, where in the past you never would have struck up a conversation with somebody about their addiction or human trafficking. And now it's perfectly acceptable because we understand that it exists and we want to be part of that change. So at Alive, we want to be part of the change of changing the conversation around what it means to live, and not just talking about the last 3-5 days of your life, but how do you live the life that you want to leave the memory to? So today I want to kind of have a conversation around how do you inspire others? So between your work here, between your role as a minister, and to see where it takes us.
Yeah, I would love that.
Good.
So you want me to answer it?
Sure. It's a big question.
It's a big question, but I had a chance to think about it a little bit.
Thank you.
And really, I think the very first thing I love to do is tell stories. Stories that inspire people and engage people. In the work of justice, in the work of ministry, in the work of legacy, you don't want to argue a position and think that that's inspiring to people. Either people will love you because they agree with you, or they will dismiss you because they don't agree with you. And I think what really inspires people is to hear a good story. I think it's why Jesus spoke in parables. I think it's why it's one of the most effective tools that we have. If I can share with you a story about a woman survivor and what she went through as a child and what the obstacles were that she had and why she was in foster care and how she went to prison, and then the amazing work she's done when she found community. In that story, you're hearing everything that I want you to hear about the injustice or the oppression or childhood trauma and its effects. But I'm telling it in a way where you get fired up and say, I want to help. I know some women that might be interested in making sure more women like the story I told have that opportunity.
So, for my curiosity, and I feel like I've heard you tell it before, but talk about the first woman. So somebody had to believe in you to be able to create a story, to share that story with others.
Well, one of the things I learned early on is if I went into the jail and I said the word home, women would start crying. That's how much people were longing for that. So getting the first 5 women who came into our first residential home in 1997, that was not hard. The hard part was you told another 40 women no.
Right.
But I just got a phone call. This is so fun. I just got a phone call the other day from a woman. Hey, Rebecca Stevens, it's Regina. And I'm calling to tell you it's been 25 years. And I'm clean and I'm sober and I'm living my best life because you believed in me. She was one of the very first women that came through, and getting that phone call, you talk about a legacy.
Sure.
It's like I've been doing it for a long time. And now there's, hundreds of women who have come through and have those stories. But for her to remember and for her to call, that was so inspiring to me.
Sure.
And that's the other thing that I think helps inspire others is when you truly get inspired by what you're doing and you feel like, I want to do this again and again and again. The other thing I just wanted to talk about a little bit, though, that as far as the inspiration goes, is that I think it's inspiring to people when you have really simple, practical ideas for how they can get involved.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't stay on this 30,000 plane that people want you to stay in. That I actually say, here's what I need you to do is buy a candle. And if you do this, and you do it with 50,000 other people, we are going to rock this world. And you're like, that is so easy and practical. I can buy a candle and light it, and light this for the women still on the streets and the women trying to find their way home. So I love that part of practicality.
Do you know, I listened to you about creating simple steps and not making them so challenging. You know, what you do here and what we do at Alive are very similar because we're asking someone to think differently.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we meet people that have a life-limiting illness. It's difficult for a physician to stop caring, you know, and to start, they're trying to cure.
Right.
They want to cure, and they want to cure as we would want. As citizens of healthcare, we would want them to fight for the cure. It's difficult sometimes to help people. Like, I see it every single day. I have the luxury of my office being next door to our inpatient unit. And when I see how families come together in those final moments, and I see love and I see joy, we see separation and sorrow too.
Right.
But to be able to say to somebody, believe in me. You know, we had a board member whose mom passed away last week, earlier this week, in fact. And I talked to her last week and I said, we're here to help. And she said, oh, I hope not to need your services. And I was thinking, oh, I hope that you would just understand how our services would be so great for you.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about that first woman saying home, sure, she found a home, but now she had to change her habits.
Yeah.
And that's where we're trying to change that conversation, that it's not just you're about to die, so you need hospice care. Understand what palliative care and hospice care are, but be okay with having conversations around it.
Right. Right. And how are you hoping not to need something around death? I
Well,
mean,
it's
that's
inevitable.
Right. It's all our journey, really. And you know, in a way, it's the idea is that we get to love all the way up to death. And we get to find those places that are inspiring and that will leave a legacy and that will bring us joy. And I do think one of the other things that we have in common is I think sometimes people are afraid to be inspired by both our work because it's scary topics.
Exactly.
Human trafficking, death, all of those things are really heavy. And what I try to say to people too is we laugh as much in these circles here at Thistle Farms with folks as we do cry.
Sure.
And I've been, you know, on deathbeds where there is great sadness, but also some of the most powerful joy I have known and some of the truest love.
You're going to make me cry in this room. We have a story that I tell before the pandemic. We had a woman who, and Liz is probably tired of hearing me tell the story, but she was early 40s, had a form of cancer, and no lie, probably over 130 guests came to see her. And one day it was her ultimate Frisbee team that came, and they all had tutus on and these colored wigs, and that was their connection to her. Another night I went over there before leaving, and we literally had babies crawling down the hallways, and that was my moment that I knew why I was there. That, you know, it was my job to make sure that there was an environment where people could have that joy and that desire to be together. And then the pandemic hit, and it's been very hard because we haven't been able to witness that. But when we were talking about like having memories, like that is my memory, and I know soon we'll be able to do that again.
Yeah.
And I wish that I could, I wish I could have videotaped that whole family and that whole opportunity for people to see that this is what it could be. Like the stories they were telling, the giggling they were doing, you know, it was just amazing.
I mean, it's one of the biggest honors is to sit with people. They allow you to sit with them at their deathbed. I mean, that's a place of honor, especially as a priest, like who's allowed in there. And, you know, it's so inspiring and humbling and all of those beautiful things.
So maybe talk about that a little bit, because we talked a little about your role here at Thistle Farms, but also your role as a minister.
Mm-hmm.
Because you did say, you know, that you are bedside, and you might be bedside or you might be further up the line when people receive the diagnosis. Talk about how you give them inspiration and hope when all they're hearing is that they're dying, when they want to focus on living.
Well, I don't know that my role in those situations is to provide the inspiration. I do think my role is to be a consistent presence, to be a consistent presence through that journey and be a pretty stable person. And maybe sometimes there's a word of inspiration, maybe sometimes, just some assurance, sometimes, somebody that you can complain about everybody else to in the family that's driving you crazy.
Yeah.
Because that happens too. And there's 4 kids, and everybody has a different idea about how they want to say goodbye to their parents and what should happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just need an advocate. But for me, in those moments, I try to just be absolutely present. Like, I don't want to trip over myself. I don't want to be my ego to get in the way. Like, oh, I better say a really beautiful prayer. Or maybe I should try to get everybody to sing Amazing Grace because I know that that's what happens in the movies. I don't need to do any of that. I just need to walk in and be present. So I do remember one of the times I was able to be a pastor at a live hospice, and there was 3 kids with their mom, and they were saying goodbye, and we had an amazing time of prayer. And the children wept and anointed their mom. It was so beautiful and wonderful, and everybody was quiet, and I decided just to slip out of the room so they could say goodbye. And so I tiptoe out of the room, and I'm going down the hall when I realize that I've left my keys and my phone sitting right there by the mom. And so I'm trying to go back in unobtrusively. And the older daughter, who was my friend, just laughed, and she said, I was waiting for you to come back. You always forget. Like, you're always, you're always the same person, really, even when you're trying to be fancy, or professional. And I love that, really. I love that we still get to be ourselves and be present.
You said something that made me think. When I joined Alive, I talked about how vulnerable you have to be, because my first month there, I cried a lot. And I have sat in this room in the circle. In fact, there was a day you came and there was a gentleman that was kind of preaching, and you kind of shut him down because you said this isn't the place for it. But like 8 people in a row cried, and I was like, oh, good golly, like, enough with the tears. And now I have a job where I walk next door, and 2 weeks ago, a gentleman's wife had passed under our care, and he said in August would have been 50 years that they would have been married. And he met her in the 2nd grade, and every single Sunday in grade school, he walked her to Sunday school. So in the 2nd grade, he knew that that was going to be the person he loved forever. And then he paused and he said, tomorrow will be the first day in 60 years that I won't see her. And I just like it was like Charlie Brown tears just started shooting out of my eyes. And I thought, my ego can't get in the way and look strong and powerful, because I was just so taken by that. And so I think when you said, you have to remember it's not about you, but it's about being the true and whole you.
Yeah.
He probably went and told his friends, I can't believe the woman at Alive just bawled when he needed probably companionship. But it just really moved me, thinking tomorrow that they won't be there. But as the family sat together and he talked about what they had done over the last 60 years, I literally went home and told my husband, I said, you better have a few nice things to say about me when the time comes.
Well, what I love, though, is that the work itself can inspire us. It's not just planning how to inspire other people, but to be inspired by the work that you do, to be a better person, to show up, to be intimate with your husband, whatever those things become. The work can do that, because the work can be hard, and there's so much beauty in being faithful to it and staying with it and going, whether or not you're inspired or not. But I think what I've learned over the years is if I keep doing the work, the inspiration will come. It'll happen in a conversation with somebody, or a telephone call from somebody that has 25 years clean, or whatever it is. But if we stick with it, we can be inspired by it.
But it is, you're right, just being present and hearing other stories inspired me to then be inspirational throughout my day.
And the other thing I've learned, and I think it connects us so well in both our work, is that, the inspiration isn't always have to be really positive and good stories. We can be inspired by the hardships or the tragedies. I mean, I have taken much inspiration from what happened on Christmas morning when we were bombed. And I felt a big desire to go downtown and just look at Second Avenue. It's been a huge part of my family's life. My husband is a singer-songwriter. My son is a singer-songwriter. My other two sons are artists. The galleries on Second Avenue, the music venues, and it just was kind of heartbreaking, and I was drawn down there. And when I stood there and I was looking at the rubble and the remnants of that violence, it was, very inspirational to me to go, we have to keep going. We do rebuild. We have to find the beauty in this. And I'm grateful that in our work and in all of our lives together, we can be inspired by the hard stuff. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And not numb out. That's the worst. That's the opposite to me. When I'm thinking about inspiration, the opposite is when I go, okay, now I'm on the couch and I'm going to watch, what do you call it? Binge watch something horrible so I never have to think again. That's the most uninspired I can be, I think.
So I wanted to ask you about John Christian in Larkspur.
Yeah.
Did he find you or did you find him?
I found him. Well, we found each other.
Okay.
John Christian and I found each other. I was inspired walking in Percy Warner Park when we saw the slave burials grounds. And you would walk on the red trail, and you walk out there and you come around the red trail around and you see the dips in the fields, and they have tiny orange markings, and it marks the graves.
Right.
And I've always been troubled by some of the newer traditions of, especially the Christian church, about how embalming and removing us from the process of death and the concrete box, vaults, all of it just felt so violent. And when I looked at that graveyard, I was like, we have to start a conservation cemetery here in Tennessee. I happened to be walking with my landscape architect friend, Tara Armistead, and we started dreaming about starting the first conservation burial place here in Tennessee that would be much more in line with really traditional burial. And my thought is, Nicodemus took Jesus down from the cross with some herbs and a shroud and spices. And if that's good enough, for Jesus, we're good with it. And really, that was the whole way that people were buried forever. So a friend of mine said, you need to meet John Christian. And John Christian, I happened to have met him. He was the funeral director, and I was the pastor for a funeral not too long ago. And he had this huge passion for natural burial. And we hit it off, and we started Larkspur. And formed a board, and now we have, 300 acres in the Middle Tennessee area, and it's going pretty well. And we've loved every time we've allowed Larkspur to be at hospice and to share that story about how it is, that if you want to live with concern for the environment and giving back and making it intimate and loving for your family to do a burial, Larkspur is the way to go. I mean, it's less expensive. It's sweet to the environment.
He told us once that it was a traditional burial was equivalent to 500 hours of carbon monoxide coming from a car versus a natural. And that, you're right, from giving back to God's earth. He is truly an inspiration. He spoke at one of our symposiums, and first the pictures he presents are just beautiful. And as you know, we've been in conversations with him before the pandemic about putting some of his art up. But I said, I can't necessarily put pictures of caskets up in that hospice organization, but one of the pictures he has is truly a gravesite where it's filled with flowers. And I thought, that's how I want to be died. Like, lay me in a field of flowers. I can't tell if it's Sugarland or Little Big Town, but somebody sings a song about when I die young, lay me in a field of flowers. And I really just took to that.
Yeah, I mean, his attention to detail, his love for people, for every creepy crawly thing, for plants, for, ideals. it's amazing. So he goes out there early and, you know, it's moss laid and everything is done. And then the families, you know, get to be outdoors and they have a service and everybody helps with the burial. It's a hands-on event.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, you are truly an inspiration to me. When I started working with 180 Health Partners, you know, I knew of Thistle, and I think at the time the cafe was under construction where you were doing the whole remodel to it. So prior to that, I think I only came in one time for a cup of tea and didn't really know much about it. And actually, if I backtrack years ago, so my daughter was maybe like 3, so about 15 years ago, a group of women from the Magdalene House came to our church. I was at Bellmead United Methodist.
Yeah, we used to come every year.
And they were talking about the Magdalene program. They were selling candles. And I think that was one of my first times here in Tennessee. I'm originally from Chicago, but my first time here in Tennessee that I understood that there was a community. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just the community of our church and our friends, but there's this community that we live in. And if we take care of each other, like I always say, if I take care of the community will take care of me. And when I stepped out and I bought my first set of candles, I think it was just candles then. It might have been some essential oils too. But I was like blown away then when I opened it up and understood, you know, the message too. When I see the women here and the women that are in the house and just, you know, how you've taken this globally, you truly are an inspiration. And, you know, I thank you for that.
Oh my gosh, I thank you, and I thank you for all the PR you're helping with the cafe, and no one should ever stop eating strawberry cake. It is the best. And thank you for all you do and how well you love,
Thank
and
you.
it is inspirational. Love, love.